Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with another episode of Get Better at Yu-Gi-Oh! Today we're going to be talking about the concept of the metagame and kind of how that varies from location to location, store to store, places around the world, etc., and what that means for you as a player preparing to play in your metagame. So just like before, we will have some articles linked down in the description. Of particular note is one by Jason Grabermeyer in which he talks about his take on the idea metagame, and I really do agree with a lot of his points, so I want to feature that. We'll be defining metagame ourselves in the coming part of the video, as well as how you can take advantage of that, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So to begin our discussion, we need to start with a definition of metagame. If you break it up, it's two parts, the prefix meta and the word game. Game, of course, is something that just relates to Yu-Gi-Oh! In this context, and that makes sense. But if you look in a dictionary, you'll actually find meta can mean a variety of things, some of which include after, along with beyond, among, or behind. And I particularly like the use of beyond and behind here, because some people like to think of metagaming as the highest echelon or level of strategy in which you are thinking beyond the actual game, looking at what your opponent is presenting and trying to outplay them by making reads as to what they are going to do. Essentially, metagaming would be going beyond the cards at the table and predicting how your opponent's going to play based on established patterns, proven strategies that tend to be more efficient and effective than others, etc. But if you look at that definition of a metagame, that really boils down to what environment are you playing in. For example, if you are going to a big tournament like a YCS nowadays, you might expect to see decks like PK Fire. You may expect to see something like Metal Foes, probably some Blue Eyes, and these are just a few examples, but these are decks that you could pretty much expect to see at any high-level competition nowadays. And if you think about that, it makes sense. These are the competitively proven decks that tend to be popular because of their ability to win, and because a lot of people just find that they're a lot more fun to play when they're able to win. When the goal is to win, they want to pick a proven strategy like this. But let's say you go to your locals. Locals is a good example where the environment completely changes depending on the types of people that are there. Maybe there are more kids that go to your stores and you're facing against starter decks a lot more. Or maybe there are some, people who play just entirely with their friends and so they don't get to play or don't have to play against all these. Maybe you're using an online platform like DevPro and you're actually seeing a good mix of random rogue strategies, as we would call them, that don't fall into the types of decks that you would see at a YCS. All of those are different metagames. To illustrate how different metagames or play environments can completely change, I'll use the environment I play against. So typically when I play with my friends, I'm playing against Synchrons of some capacity, so a deck, for instance, that you might want to main deck Max C for. I may also play against Frog Monarchs, so now it's a slower deck that doesn't necessarily special summon consistently without that Treeborn Frog once a turn, and so now all of a sudden Max C doesn't look all that great an option. Then we have Black Wings, which is a deck that plays tons and tons of back row, including the annoying Black Whirlwind, whereas these two decks barely play anything at all. And then my brother tends to play a random deck that he switches around from time to time, but he usually focuses on something with Beals that makes it so you can't really get rid of the monsters through traditional means. So it's a very varied metagame, as you can see, with a bunch of different types of strategies. And this type of environment is actually pretty diverse. As I described already, we have different speeds, different types of commitment to the board, different ways of summoning big monsters to win the game. And as you can see, because of that, the main deck I make for this type of environment and to address these issues will be entirely different from what I would do at a YCS. For example, if I want to stop these annoying monsters, I might be wanting to play something like Breakthrough Skill in the main deck or Effect Veiler, something along those lines. But if I'm expecting to play against a ton of Magispectors, then playing any sort of targeting negation in the main deck would be foolhardy because the environment I'm playing in with Magispectors would make that an inherent weakness in a big portion of my matchups. So, depending on where you are, you need to completely address what your individual goals are for your deck, as well as what types of problems will you be facing against those strategies and what type of tech cards should you put in to address it. A good example beyond just Max C, another one would be a card like MS Tier Twin Twisters. In my metagame, to be completely honest, it'd be a completely dead card against probably at least half, sometimes even a third of the metagame, so I may want to just side them in specifically for Blackwings. A card like Max C, I may want to play in the main despite the Monarchs not being very heavy on special summons because the rest of them special summon all the time. But then I would need to make sure I have enough ways to cover my weakness against Monarchs if I'm playing a deck that gets dismantled by cards like Caius, or the Fiends, Majesty and Vanity's Fiend, because I know that I'll be playing against these 4 decks frequently enough if I'm just playing around with my friends. And finally, I just want to go over a few different examples of decks you may see as either rogue strategies that pop up in big tournaments, around at your locals, or even if you're just playing online that you may expect to see. First off is Masked Heroes. This is always a popular strategy because it's very consistent in getting out its boss monster Darklaw that has the ability to put a lot of pressure on the opponent by preventing their strategy from actually getting anywhere. If you combine that with the fact that Treat Toad coming up soon in Invasion Vengeance in November has the potential to make this deck get even more powerful, it's a threat to be reckoned with that many people probably will be testing out right now, so keep that in mind. We may have a deck like Lightsworn. Lightsworns are a very popular archetype. Ever since they came out, they've been popular, and really, you'll probably see them at least once anytime you're playing long-term online or at a local event. Just because the power level and speed Lightsworns provide for such a low value makes them a great budget deck that many players can either get into easily or just continue playing from previous formats. Sure, they may not be the best strategy for taking on the current top metagames at YCSs, but it's very possible that a deck like this that has all the tools necessary to perform in a variety of situations could take you by surprise if you're playing a deck that's not prepared to take down Lightsworns. So think about if you're playing, for instance, on Dev Pro and your deck's not meant to deal with Lightsworns as, oh, that's the one bad matchup that I didn't prepare for. Finally, another example is an entirely different stun type of deck like Pure Cyframes. This type of deck is entirely different in that it doesn't care so much about the speed at which you can do things, it cares much more about whether or not you can produce enough threats to overwhelm its answers, because if they have more answers than you have threats, then they're going to be able to shut you out of the game entirely, no matter how fast your strategy may be in a big YCS type of setting. So this isn't intended to be an all-inclusive list or anything, it's just to give you some different ideas of decks you may play against in a variety of different environments. And the take-home message here is that because the environment you play in could differ based on the types of cards people choose to play, you'll want to reevaluate your deck and think, what exactly am I building this for? Am I trying to win a tournament? If so, look at those deck lists and see if you can make a deck that addresses the common patterns and problems you would see there. Versus if you're going into a more open metagame or a more unique metagame that you usually go to at your locals, friends, whatever, then make sure you build for that. I personally don't think there is one way to build a deck that will be perfect in all environments because, again, the way the game works is that there are cards to counter every card, and if your friend happens to be the one playing Dragon Capture Jars all the time against your Dragon decks and you have no effective way to get rid of that, which I guess would have been a problem more back in the day, then those hard counters can take you out no matter what type of thing you are playing. So just keep things in perspective. You can't make a perfect deck that deals with everything, but you can predict what your opponent would do in a specific environment and use that to your advantage. Hopefully you guys found this episode interesting. If you found it helpful, please leave a like and share with your friends that you think would get some benefit out of this video. The rest of the series is in the description box down below for your convenience as well. If you have any other suggestions on topics you would like to see covered in Get Better at Yu-Gi-Oh, then please let me know, and I will see how I can integrate them into the schedule. And, as usual, hope you guys enjoy. This is JDGaming, and I'll see you guys next time.